I was the Duke of Blackmoor's closest friend for 20 years, and in all that time I only saw him lose command of himself twice. The first was the morning he discovered she had gone. The second was the afternoon he discovered she had stayed, that she had been there, all along, just beyond the reach of his searching, keeping his secret in a cottage by the river, with a boy who had his eyes. My name is James Hale. I am a second son of no particular importance, which is perhaps why Blackmoor and I were friends. He did not need to perform for me, and I did not need anything from him. We had known each other since Eton, where he had been the quiet, serious boy who read Latin for pleasure while the rest of us threw bread rolls, and I had been the loud, careless boy who threw the most bread rolls and regretted none of them. He became the Duke at 19. I became a man who drank too much claret and managed a modest living in Hertfordshire. We should have drifted apart. We did not. I tell you this so you understand. I knew him. I knew the weight of that title on his shoulders, the way it had turned a warm boy into a guarded man, the silences he wore like armor. And I knew, the spring he hired the new governess for his nephew's boy, that something had changed. Something had broken open. Her name was Catherine Webb, and she arrived at Blackmoor in March, with a single trunk, a letter of reference from a vicar in Dorset, and a composure so steady it bordered on stubbornness. She was not striking, a slight woman with brown hair and gray eyes, and a habit of looking at you as though she were reading the last page of a book you had not yet started. She had been engaged to tutor young Thomas, the orphaned son of the Duke's late sister, who had come to live at Blackmoor after his parents died, and who had, in the 18 months since, refused to speak to anyone who tried. Catherine did not try. That was the first thing I noticed. She sat beside the boy in the nursery and read aloud, not to him, but beside him, as though his silence were a door she did not intend to force. On the third day, Thomas moved his chair closer to hers. On the fifth, he turned a page for her. On the 9th, he whispered a word. Just one. The name of a dog in the story. And Catherine did not react, did not exclaim or praise, just kept reading, as though nothing extraordinary had happened. It was extraordinary. The Duke stood in the corridor outside the nursery, listening, and I stood beside him, and I watched his face change. Not soften exactly. Something deeper than softening. Something like recognition, as though he were seeing, for the first time, a version of the world he had stopped believing existed. He began to find reasons to be near her. He visited the schoolroom to inquire about Thomas's progress, daily at first, then twice daily, then at odd hours that had nothing to do with the boy and everything to do with the woman teaching him. He brought her books from his library, first the ones she needed, and then the ones he thought she might enjoy. And when she thanked him, he would nod curtly and leave, and I would find him in his study afterwards, staring at nothing, running his thumb along the edge of a ledger he had not opened. "You are watching her," I said one afternoon when we were riding the eastern boundary, and he turned in his saddle for the third time to look back toward the house. "I am not. You have checked the nursery window 4 times since we mounted." I counted. He was silent for a long time. Then, "She is very good with the boy." "She is very good with you too," I said. "You smile now. Did you know that? You smile, and it is always when she is in the room." He did not answer, but he did not deny it. I watched their courtship, if you could call it that, unfold over the spring. He was halting and formal. She was cautious and precise. They circled each other like two people who had each been hurt badly enough to know the cost of reaching out, and who could not, despite that knowledge, stop reaching. He asked her opinion on the estate accounts, and she gave it, directly, without flattery, and he listened. She asked him about the history of the house, and he told her, more than he had ever told anyone, about his father, his sister, the weight of being the last of a line. They walked in the garden after Thomas was in bed, their voices low, their hands never quite touching, and the household watched with the kind of held-breath anticipation that servants reserve for things they have been hoping for. On the 15th of May, I know the date, because he told me afterwards, in a voice I had never heard from him before, a voice scraped raw with joy, he proposed. They were in the walled garden, where the pear trees bloomed along the south wall. He had planned, I think, something measured and appropriate. What he actually said, according to his own accounting, was, "I cannot imagine this house without you. I do not want to. Will you stay? Not as governess, as mine." She said yes. She put her hand on his chest and said yes, and he told me later that he could feel her trembling, and he held her hand against his heart until she was steady. He came to my room that night, the last guest room at the end of the east corridor, and he stood in the doorway and said, "She said yes, James." And he was smiling in a way I had not seen since we were boys. And I thought, at last he has found the thing that undoes the armor. By morning, she was gone. The letter was on her pillow, 4 lines, in her careful hand. "Forgive me. I cannot explain. I have no right to ask. But please, do not look for me." It was real. Every word of it was real. He looked for her. He spent a fortune. Investigators in London, inquiries in every county, notices placed with discretion in every gazette. He rode to Dorset himself and found the vicar who had written her reference, who told him that Catherine Webb had been a governess in 3 households, that she had no family, that she was honest and competent and private, and that he did not know where she had gone. The months that followed were the worst I had known at Blackmoor. The Duke withdrew. He stopped visiting the nursery. He stopped writing the boundaries. He stopped smiling. The smiling that had been new and fragile and hers. Mrs. Lennox, the housekeeper, told me that he sat in his study until the candles burned out, and then sat in the dark, and that the only sound she heard was the scratch of a pen on paper, letters he wrote and never sent, to a woman who had vanished as though she had never existed. Thomas stopped speaking again. I visited quarterly, then monthly, and watched my friend become a man shaped entirely by absence. He did not rage. He did not drink. He simply emptied, the way a house empties when no one lights the fires. Still standing, still functional, but cold to the core. "Perhaps she had her reasons," I said once. "Her reasons," he repeated, as though tasting something bitter. She said it was real. If it was real, what reason could be large enough? I had no answer. I do not think there was one. 5 years passed. I was traveling through the Cotswolds on a matter of no consequence, a horse I had been meaning to look at, a friend I had been meaning to visit, when I stopped in a village called Arden to rest my horse and eat at the inn. It was a small place, stone cottages and a church and a stream that ran alongside the high street, and I would have forgotten it by evening if I had not, walking along the stream to stretch my legs, seen a woman sitting on the bank with a boy. She was reading aloud. The boy was beside her, his chin propped on his knees, listening with the absorbed stillness of a child who has heard this particular voice read 1,000 stories and trusts it completely. I knew her immediately. 5 years older, thinner, her hair longer, and pulled back with a plain ribbon, but unmistakably Catherine Webb. She looked up and saw me, and the color left her face. Then I looked at the boy. He was 4, perhaps 5. Dark hair, not her brown but the Duke's near black, a firm jaw, and his eyes. Those eyes, dark, steady, serious, and so exactly the Duke of Blackmoor's, that my breath stopped in my chest, and the world tilted, and I stood there on the bank of a stream, in a village I had never heard of and understood, in a single sickening, clarifying instant, why she had run. "Mr. Hale," she said, just that. My name, spoken with the kind of calm that is not calm at all, but the last defense of a woman who has been dreading this moment for 5 years. "Catherine." The boy looked at me with his father's eyes and said, "Mama, who is that man?" She put her arm around him. "A friend," she said, "from a long time ago." We talked in her cottage after the boy was in bed. It was a small place, 2 rooms, clean, spare, with books on every surface, and a garden out the back where she grew herbs and vegetables. She taught at the village school. The villagers knew her as Mrs. Webb, a widow. The boy's name was Edward. She told me everything. She had known she was carrying the Duke's child before the night he proposed. They had been together once. A single evening in the library, a fire burning low, his hand in her hair. And I will not describe what passed between them, because it is not mine to tell. She had not meant for it to happen, neither had he, but it had, and she had known within weeks what it meant. I could not tell him, she said. Her hands were folded in her lap, her voice level, but I could see the effort it cost her. He is a duke. I was a governess. If I told him I was carrying his child after he proposed, what would the world say? That I had planned it, that I had seduced him, that I was a scheming servant who had trapped the most eligible man in the county into marriage. His friends, his family, his peers, they would have believed it. They would have said it to his face, and eventually, she stopped. Eventually he might have believed it too. He would not have, I said. You do not know that. I did not know that, and I could not bear to find out. So you ran. I ran. I took a coach to Bristol. I found a position in Bath, and then another in Cheltenham, and then I came here, and I had Edward, and I taught school, and I built a life. A small life, but a life in which no one looked at me and saw a woman who had traded her body for a title. I sat in her small parlor with the candle burning and the boy sleeping in the next room, and I thought about my friend. 5 years of silence, 5 years of letters written and never sent, 5 years of a man hollowed out by the absence of the only woman who had ever reached him. And I said, Catherine, I cannot keep this from him. She closed her eyes. I know, she said. I have always known that if this day came, I would not ask you to. I rode back to Blackmoor in 2 days. I walked into his study without knocking, the fire unlit, the curtains half drawn, the room a monument to 5 years of disciplined grief, and I told him. I have never seen a man move faster. He was on his horse before I had finished describing the cottage, and he rode through the night, and I followed as quickly as I could, arriving the next morning to find his horse tied at her gate and the cottage door open. I did not go in. I stood in the lane and waited, and what I heard through the open window was this. His voice, low and hoarse. 5 years. You gave me 5 years of believing you did not want me. Her voice, steady but breaking at the edges. I gave you 5 years of never having to doubt me, never having to wonder whether I loved you, or whether I loved what you could give me. I would never have doubted you. You are a duke. I was a governess. The world would have doubted for you. And doubt, once planted, is patient. It grows in the dark. I could not watch it grow. A silence. Then his voice again, and it was the voice of the boy I had known at Eton, the warm boy who had not yet learned to guard himself. Where is he? Sleeping. His name is Edward. Another silence. Longer this time. I heard footsteps. I heard a door open. I heard nothing for a long time. And then I heard the Duke of Blackmoor make a sound that was not quite a word and not quite a sob. And I knew he was standing over his son's bed, looking at a face that was his own in miniature, and that 5 years of silence were shattering in his chest. When he came out, his eyes were red, and his voice was rough, and he said, to Catherine, standing in the doorway of the small cottage with her arms wrapped around herself, come home. You do not have to. I have to. I have needed to for 5 years, and I did not know where to send the need. Come home. Bring Edward. Bring everything. Bring the books and the herbs and the life you built, and put it inside mine, because mine has been empty since you left and I am finished pretending otherwise. She wept then. I think it was the first time in 5 years. She put her face against his chest and he held her, and the boy appeared in the doorway behind them, barefoot and sleepy, and he looked up at this tall, dark stranger holding his mother, and said, with the matter-of-fact clarity that only a child possesses, "Are you the man from the stories?" The Duke looked down at his son. What stories? Mama tells me about a man who lives in a big house with a garden and a library. She says he is very brave and very good, and that he does not know it. The Duke looked at Catherine. She would not meet his eyes. Yes, he said, I am the man from the stories. Edward considered this. She said you would come, he said. She said it might take a long time, but you would come. The Duke knelt on the flagstone floor of that small cottage, and he took his son's hand, and he said, she was right. I am sorry it took so long." They returned to Blackmoor 3 days later. The Duke, the governess who had vanished, and the boy with his father's eyes. Thomas, now 9, met them at the door, and when he saw Catherine, he spoke. The first full sentence he had said in years. "I knew you would come back." The county talked. Of course it talked. A duke, a governess, a secret child, a 5-year absence. It was the kind of story that polite society dines on for a season. But the Duke of Blackmoor had been feared for 20 years. And fear, it turns out, has its uses. No one said a word to his face. And after a time, after Catherine had reorganized the household and replanted the kitchen garden and resumed reading aloud in the nursery, this time with Edward on her knee and Thomas beside her, the talk faded, the way talk always fades when the truth beneath it is too sturdy to topple. I was best man at the wedding. It was a small ceremony. Just the family, the household, and myself, in the chapel at Blackmoor, with white pear blossoms from the walled garden, and Edward holding the ring on a cushion and looking very serious about the responsibility. When the Duke slid the ring onto Catherine's finger, she looked at him and said, so quietly that only I could hear, "It was real, every word of it." He said, "I know, I always knew. I am an old man now, and I have seen a great deal of the world, and I can tell you that love is not always a grand thing. Sometimes it is a woman sitting by a stream, reading aloud to a boy with his father's eyes, waiting, not with hope, not with certainty, but with the quiet, stubborn patience of someone who has decided that the truth, even hidden, even silent, even carried alone for 5 years in a cottage in the Cotswolds, is worth keeping. She vanished the night he proposed. She came back with his whole world in her arms.